Hello everybody. The video today is under the title The Stages in Test Design, Construction, and Administration. So we are going to learn the stages that we need to follow, or the steps that we need to follow in order to construct and design a test. So if you are looking for some insights on how could you construct an effective and a good test to your students, then this video is prepared for you. So let us get started. So there are a number of things that you need to keep in mind before and after you design the test so that your test will be practical, valid, and reliable to your students. So we are going to talk about designing clear and ambiguous purpose or objectives. We're also going to talk about drawing up test specifications. We are also going to talk about devising these tests, especially designing multiple choice items. And last but not least, we're going to talk about administering the test. With regards to the objectives, the elements within the test, the objectives need to be clearly defined, measurable, and doable. So you can just say, for example, I want my students to speak English. This is a huge goal to measure. So you want to choose something more specific so that you can assign point value to it in this score. Like, for example, using expressions of certainty or uncertainty to speak English, or maybe using expressions of advice, using a particular language function instead of just, saying speaking English as a whole. Drawing up test specifications. Test specifications include a description, a rich description of the test, the items, types, tasks, and skills to be used, the number of items on each section, the time allocated for each item, how well the test be scored and reported, simple and clearly understood directions, rubrics in some evaluative scheme, the implied elicitation, response format for items. So you need to have all these elements so that you could devise the test or revise it, or someone else might do that later on, because this is like a recipe. So you need to keep all these elements in mind. Devising test tasks. As you devise the test, you need to consider the factors such as validity, practicality, and watchdog, because this may have an effect on the results of the test takers. Now that you have made your first draft, you need to ask these questions. The first one is each item stated in clear, simple language? Does the item meet a specified objective? Are the wrong items clearly wrong? Means there is no room for other possible wrong answers. Is the difficulty of each item appropriate for your students? If it's not, then you need to revise again your first draft. With regards to multiple choice items, of course, multiple choice items are practical and reliable to some extent, but there are some issues to consider. They only assess passive knowledge, means that there is no production, limits washback in what can be tested, and they are easily impacted by cheating and guessing. These are the components of multiple choice item: the theme, the key, and distractors. So the theme is the content of the questions. Then we have the key, which is the answer, and then we have distractors. Distractors means that if you have a question with 4 possible answers, So we have only one answer, whereas the other three are distractors. Each multiple choice should test only one objective and ensure that the key is clear and obvious. So you make sure that you only test one item. Assess created items using item facility and item discrimination. Item facility identifies how um, easy or difficult a test item is to the group of test takers, while item discrimination identifies how well a test item discriminates between high score recipients and low score recipients. Let's move to administering the test. Of course, before you give the test to your students, you need to pilot the test. You need to test the test by yourself and make sure that your students will be able to answer that test. You need to provide pre-test considerations. You prepare the room for your students. You prepare the environment. So you should create an environment for your students in which they can work on the test without any problems. You offer a review checklist for your students and you notify them of the remaining time. Of course, you can just write on the board the remaining time of the exam so that students will keep track of that time. Be accessible for questions. You should be ready to answer the questions of your students and deal with any problem that they have. Administering the test. Before you even administer the test, you need to take into consideration some important elements like scoring, for example. You need to determine the scoring rubrics and item weights. For example, question number 1 worth 5 points, and question number 2 worth more than this, and goes on. Review and revise rubrics in item weights. So as you go through the test, you need to revise these items in rubrics. Grading. You need to determine the grading scale, what type of grading scale that you want to use. So it's up to you to decide on the grading scale. Giving feedback. This is very important. You need to offer a rich feedback to your students because in this way they will develop themselves and learn from their mistakes. This feedback can be offered individually or in groups or to the entire class. You could just say that 20 people, for example, get this task correct, and whereas 5 people or 5 students didn't answer this question. I hope you have learned something from this presentation. This is all what we have today, and see you later.